My name is Adam Remeniski, and this is Distant Existence at M Galleries P&A. So the title Distant Existence came while I was in a phone conversation with my mentor and co-curator, Wes Sherman. The original title of the exhibition was meant to be The Human Condition, which is an ode to the title of most of the works here, which end up being song titles. Most of the music that I listen to has an influence in my work, and I felt like adding the song titles as a part of the work kind of pinpointed that moment in time where it allows you as the audience to hear what I was listening to while I was making the work, and it felt that one of my favorite albums, The Human Condition by John Bellion, was going to be a fitting title for the exhibition as a whole. After further conversation with my mentor and co-curator, Wes Sherman, we had decided on the title Distant Existence. Truly, it was more of a catch-all. It felt like it described the work better. The main work is not about the human condition. It's about this idea of seeing a place that you've never. It's an idea about feeling familiar in a place you've never seen, and the works are all tapping in from my subconscious that whether it be a reference or a place I've been to, the work kind of exemplifies that. Yeah, so the shadow is kind of a way for me to connect with the work. It's meant to be anyone in the audience. It kind of enables you to interact with the work, which I think is the most important thing, rather than just be a painting on the wall. The shadow almost places the viewer into the work, and having the shadow kind of has felt like this personal iconography that I've been attached to that I can then relate to my work in a way that's just different than making it. The concept of the horizon line and the shadow are two rules that I always have in my work. Whenever I start a painting, it's a little overwhelming to start with a blank canvas, and I feel like having two rules almost sets the tone and allows me to have a basis for what I work off of. And although that may sound limiting because you're already setting rules for yourself before you even make something, it almost allows me to think differently every time I create something. Having the shadow and the horizon line forces me to create a different horizon line and a different shadow with the work to feel fresh and current with what I'm doing rather than just kind of have a repetition. And the work has a repetition. I mean, like you said, there's 12 pieces here that are watercolor and color pencil, and the shadow feels the same throughout all of them. It's kind of this outlined, dragged shape that creates a foreground, while as the largest piece, the 13th piece, is an oil painting, so the shadow feels more grounded in the space. The idea of the horizon line also can change in my mind. I feel like sometimes it's not as visible as others. Sometimes it's a line that goes directly from side to side, while as other times it could be the trim of a brush, or it could be the edge of a cliff. I don't think it always has to be so obvious, I would say, is a lack of a better word. But the idea of the shadow as a whole has kind of been something that I want to have represent me without actually being in the work. It allows the work to be not just a landscape piece, but also a figurative piece as well. There are other people that have done the shadow in the past. The original idea for the shadow came while looking at Wes's work, actually. One of his paintings, titled The Connoisseur in the Park, had the shadow, and I immediately fell in love with the idea. I wrote about it in the book. And an artist that I reference a lot, Deborah Brown, she uses her shadow in a really interesting way. It's a lot more similar to the oil painting that I did, which has the shadow really grounded in the foreground. She is a painter that I believe uses acrylic paint, and our pieces are a lot more large scale, but the shadow and the idea of her landscape comes from photographs of her walks when she goes with her dog usually. So that actually has been one of the biggest influences in sort of how I can make the shadow feel like my own, how it has that sense of repetition throughout, and I would say how it feels like you're really in the space. She does it in a really successful way, and I look at her work a lot. Exactly, yeah. I mean, the idea for the space was, being granted a solo exhibition, there's kind of a lot you can play with versus a group exhibition. When you're working with other artists, you have to stay in the realm of the curator, and I feel like you have to respect the other people that are having the show. But at the end of the day, I was given the space, and I felt like if I'm going to be given a single room, how can I play that up the most and, have it almost complement the work in a really, really engaging way. There's something special about seeing these images online. A lot of people like how they look online. They're a lot cleaner, but when you come and see the work in person, having it framed and then seeing it on a wall allows the space to become a part of the painting itself too. So I wanted to make sure that the shadow on the ground was representing that, I guess. I didn't want to just put the paintings up. I wanted to make the space feel like one of them as well. And even just the space that we're in, you know, being in this, on this land, like the woodland area, I feel like also complements the work really well, because a lot of the images that people can relate with right away are trees or bushes and a lot of things that are stemmed from nature, you know, a lot of like our everyday observations. But being in this space, you know, I think it takes the art outside of the room as well. It allows you to think about the paintings in a different way. I've grown up being in fine arts, and I think that there's a beauty in having a pencil in your hand. And I think that the color pencil I use here allows me to get a variation in line. It works in a way that gouache does, where you're able to get a flat shape. I think this is a great example of it. Having those red shapes on the outside is something that only a few mediums can have that flatness to it. And then all the other variation in texture comes from either the sharpness of the color pencil or you know, the way you rotate the pencil to have a certain edge to it. So the color pencil and watercolor initial selection was stemmed from doing this as a project for class. It was something that I wasn't really experimenting on my own terms. I was, you know, taking a watercolor class, so it came down to just using the medium and then figuring out that I can use it in a way that feels true to myself rather than thinking of it as classwork. And I ended up developing around 80 or 90 of these pieces, and the 12 that I selected ended up being the ones that I showed. So the true selection of medium, I would say, was not even my decision at the end of the day. Yeah, it's an intimate moment, I think. You know, a sense of self-reflection, isolation, which we very rarely have anymore, and very rarely have with nature in general. So I think that these moments kind of force that. I'm Remeniski. This is Distant Existence here at M Galleries P&A, and I hope you enjoy it.